Is by David Sabata, Learning from a Land of Many Uses, Springs, Biodiversity, and Archaeology at Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument, Utah.
Thank you all. Yes, my talk is titled Learning from a Land of Many Uses, Livestock and Mining at the Grand Staircase-Escalante National Monument. No, right? Isn't that what we're talking about when we talk about multiple uses of public lands these days, right? Like energy development, grazing, maybe recreation. I got 3 anyway. Have any more? That's about it. That's what we get under colonial mindset. But I am a Bureau of Livestock and Mining archaeologist, probably not for much longer, but I'm here in a non-official capacity to share with you about my graduate research at the Staircase, conducted over the last couple of seasons prior to this one, 2016 and 2017, for which I was recently awarded my master's degree from NAU, Department of Anthropology. And I'm very excited to share with you sort of the completed results after I processed the results of my second season and added those to my first season, which I presented last year here. Who was here for my first talk last year? All right, great. How many people in the room here are involved in CRM archaeology? I'm just kind of curious. It's a resource management. All right, maybe like half or something like that. So my background is primarily in cultural resource management archaeology. I've been a professional archaeologist since 2005 or so. I worked on 50-something projects throughout the Intermountain West before deciding to go back to school because I thought I had something worth doing. I thought it was probably important to wait until I had something to go back, do that. And same with the Pecos conference. I feel like I'm here because I have something that I want you to think about as we go out there. And my, cultural resource laws have been developed to ensure that places of significance are respected and protected, right? That we take care of things from the Grand Canyon to the Grand Staircase to Bears Ears to important sites like Casa Grande and all these things in between, right? But we look, as archaeologists at material culture, like our theory of stuff, right, is that stuff is really important, right? Like we get really excited about stuff. I loved that talk earlier. And we get excited about stuff. And so as we go out there and we look for places to protect, what do we want to protect? The stuff, right? Protect the stuff. But what brought people to those places, right? Like that's like, this is a shift of thinking that happened with me some time ago. Back in Utah in 2013, I was working on a large-scale energy transmission line project with Paiute elder women, and I'd get excited about stuff like I always have. I found a broken arrowhead, and I went running up to this guy. It was maybe like the 3rd time I brought her one in a week or something. Look at this one, and she was like sick of me, and she was like, "You archaeologists get so excited about this broken rocks." She was like, "This is our trash, we kept the good stuff, I was, okay, kind of deflated my arrowhead hunting ego, because that's what I grew up doing. I love that stuff. But I started to listen to her, and what actually upset her about the project wasn't the, dispersion of a bunch of broken, micro-debitage and stuff, but it was the destruction of the culturally significant plants on those sites, the pinyon, the juniper, sometimes the lemonade berry, the roost, the rose. And I started listening to this woman about the uses of these plants. I became really inquisitive, and she'd tell me, "Oh yeah, we use the pitch from this to line our water baskets," or we would take this and the roots, and we'd split the twig in 3 ways, and then we'd make this cordage and baskets and all this and that. And I was like, man, it was tough because I was there as an archaeological monitor with stop work authority to help address the concerns of this cultural expert, of the Paiute, and I felt like I was powerless, right, to do anything about these plants. Every now and then we got them to miss a 1,000-year-old juniper or something like that, and that was great. But it really changed my ideas about, what's of significance on the landscape, and it really inspired me to go back to school here at NAU to try to learn indigenous perspectives on the cultural significance of natural resources. And so this is a great place to do it, right? Like, what's in our backyard here? The San Francisco Peaks. Where are we at right now? We're like, if you don't know it, we're on the edge of one of the biggest Indian gardens in the American Southwest here, on the southwest-facing aspect of Humphreys. We're in the vicinity of one of the only perennial springs here on the mountain, La Rose Spring, which was colonized by the son of Brigham Young in 1878, at a time when 24 tribes still relied on this spring for water. When a couple dozen tribes still came to this place every single year to gather edible roots and medicinal plants and things like that. And that's been profoundly changed by what Snowball's doing up there, spraying treated effluent and this and that. But there's a Mayan medicine woman at NAU who was trained in Highlands, Guatemala, in the expert use of 90-something species. She can find over half of them here in the vicinity of this mountain. And that kind of sparked a thing in my mind while I was signing at NAU, like, wow, you know, we've got this long history of people bringing seeds north, right? And anyway, that kind of jives with some Puebloan migration narratives. And this all got my thinking going, but I got kind of depressed about the situation up here on the mountain because politics and money seem to override all these other uses of the land. We got one use up there on the land, it's overriding all these other uses of the land. So I decided, okay, well, I'm going to go do my research at the Grand Staircase because they offered me a job. So I was like, I'll do it, and it's a good spot, right? So I worked as a BLM archaeologist out there for 2 seasons, best job in the world, grab the truck keys, like leave on a Monday, don't see anybody all week, come back on a Friday. So let's see here. I'll give you a little bit of background on the Grand Staircase before I get going much further. It was the largest protected area in the lower 48 states, about 2 million contiguous acres surrounded by other large protected areas, right? Bryce, Zion, Glen Canyon, Arizona Strip, all these wonderful places. It was set up to respect and protect cultural and natural resources and as like an outdoor laboratory of sorts. So the motto is to learn from the land. That's part of my title, my talk. And ecological connections were really emphasized in this science emphasis, proclamation of that place. It covers 3 diverse physiographic provinces. There's over 3,000 feet elevation variation. And they were hoping that the things we learned from that place over a 20-year period, whatever, well, hopefully they thought, just forever, would be used as a model to improve land management elsewhere, so throughout the Bureau of Land Management system. So this was the first national monument that they were given to manage. A little bit more on the natural setting here. 90% of Utah's biodiversity can be found on the monument. Something like 90% of animals on the monument depend on springs as their sole water source. There's over 1,200 species of plants documented on the monument, but there's really unknown biodiversity with respect to animals. One study of bees revealed over 600 species. So that's just one, family of animal there, but we really don't have no idea what the scope is of the biodiversity. But it has one of the highest concentrations of threatened and endangered species in the United States. Very wide range of ecosystems from lowland deserts to upland ponderosa pine forests. And there's springs everywhere, but they're about a half-day walk apart anywhere you go. And streams are spring-fed, not snow runoff like I've read in some archaeological reports, although that probably happens in high melt years. But the vast majority of science on the Grand Staircase has been done on dead stuff. Mostly paleontology, a bunch of dinosaurs, geology, and archaeology, which sadly is mostly dead. And so the background, the cultural context is that, there's 12,000 years of human occupation out there on the landscape, and we've got a couple paleo points, that's cool. But what's really exciting to me when I got out there and started learning about that area is the work of Louderbeck and Pavlik, the U of U, with the little wild potato. And they've shown from materials recovered in sheltered contexts, some phytolithic washes that they did on monos, that people have been processing the little wild potato in that area for 11,500 years. Where's the potato from? It's from South America. It's one of those things that moved up. So our idea of the Paleolithic are these spear chucking dudes after megafauna, right? Megafauna. Not quite. They're not the only dudes. Yeah, they're out there. But we got South American farmers here in the Southwest for 10,000 years. And the thing is, right outside that sheltered context where they found that little wild potato, it's still growing right there. It's still there. So these things persist, and they have an incredible long period of persistence. Some of them persist better than others, right? We got domestics that don't persist, right, unless you care for them every year. And then there's a bunch of things that persist. And so I thought that was fascinating. And like the people of South America that planted food forests and things like that have been really, thankfully I'm loud. That have been well documented. In South America, Puebloan people also planted a bunch of species that persist in vicinity of springs. And we can look to Puebloan ethnography and listen to people who know their culture best to look at how they planted willow, cottonwood, cattail, potato, wolfberry, tobacco, and many other things in vicinity of springs and the fields in vicinity of their archaeological, what we find as archaeological, but their habitation complexes. There's other plants in there too, chinopods, amaranths, beeweed, ground cherry. We had some mention earlier from these macrobotanical collections, grasses, mustards, sunflowers. Those are the most common edible things on the landscape. But the Paiute were the most numerous recent people in that area. So I kind of started my search of what's culturally significant in terms of natural resources out there. We've got some really great information on them. Thanks to the work of Isabel Kelly, an ethnographer out there doing work in 32, 33. We know a bit about them. And what I thought was really interesting about her work is that Paiute people, they lived around springs. As close as they could get to owning anything, they owned springs. Springs were passed down hereditarily through time. Darn, I don't have a lot of time. But they also owned patches of plants. And so what I tried to do is I looked at Paiute ethnographies, Puebloan ethnographies, and Navajo ethnographies to compile a list of species that were important to these peoples. And I went out looking for them at a bunch of springs. I went to half the named and mapped springs on the Staircase. These are major springs that people have been going to, depending on for a long time, but probably only 1/3 or 1/4 of the springs actually on the landscape, if you add in seeps and stuff. That's based on analysis by Spring Stewardship Institute. But anyway, I went to half these places. I recorded a bunch of culturally significant plants, and then I accumulated uses from these, for like a dozen ethnographies for all these plants. And I recorded over 1,000, I collated over 1,000 uses of all these plants related to medicine, edibility, crafts, ceremonialism. So we're talking, we're going from livestock, mining, and recreation to over 1,000 uses that provided for every need of people across the landscape out there. And I looked at associated archaeology within a 1-mile radius control group of upland places not associated with water, and I looked at the plants that were recorded there by actual botanists, not me, though I got to work with some, and I looked at the archaeology in the vicinity of those places and compared them to springs here. So I'm skipping over some stuff, but Southwestern archaeologists have long noted that there's a correlation between water resources and springs. Walter Hoff said wherever there's a spring or running water, there's a place to look for ruins. The results of my study just confirmed that basically. Like, I hypothesized that there'd be more important biodiversity at spring sites than non-spring sites and have more archaeology. In general, when I combined both my first and second seasons of data, I found, generally speaking, they're positively covariant. There's about 50% more important biodiversity in vicinity of springs and about 50% more archaeology in vicinity of springs than non-spring sites and or upland sites. But that's just the average. Some places are much more interesting than others and much more significant than others. And so at the high end of my spectrum, I had one of the coolest sites I visited was actually not on the Grand Staircase, but next door in the KFO, Knapp Field office, to get a little comparative thing going on. I had 200% the average culturally significant biodiversity and 250% more archaeology in a 1-mile radius, even though they'd only surveyed 1/4 of that landscape within that 1-mile radius. And this was a site type that consistently scored among the highest of my sites, and it's the alcove spring site. And when I was adding up my plants, I'd add up things from the midden, because you get a bunch of things in the middens of these archaeological contexts that you don't get elsewhere, because you don't want to go that far to use the bathroom at night, so you just go out, dig a little hole in the middle, right, cover it up, and guess what? There's where your big prickly pears going, your big banana yucca, your currants, your chokecherry, right, like your sumac, like all kinds of things. And then there's things that they planted in vicinity of springs, are down below there. And so I found chokecherry, not chokecherry, ground cherry, which is in the Solanaceae, the potato family, datura, the Solanaceae just in general. Yarnell, he wrote in his great thesis back in the day, distinctive flora of Puebloan ruins are highly correlated with places of past human occupation. And basically what I wanted to do here is figure out a protocol by which we could account for the cultural significance of plants on the landscape. So if you ever go out there and you survey some area and you don't find archaeology, well, guess what? In those places, I still found 400 uses of plants, like in any random spot, So we can't say those places aren't culturally significant, right? They're culturally significant, but we ought to better account for that significance, especially when we're recording places that are obviously next to springs or springs dependent. And I've been asking people, was that place next to spring? Was that place next to spring? And everybody said, we've had a lot of great examples of things here in vicinity of springs, Mitchell Springs, Buffalo Springs, Cottonwood Spring, Moon House is above a great big spring. And when we map sites, we map them according to the archaeological distribution of this stuff, but we need to make sure we account for those naturally significant resources, because if you take some elder traditional Hopi to those places today, the first thing they'll do is make an offering at that spring, and they're still making offerings at springs on Grand Staircase, even though it's no longer a monument. Paiute people are still making offerings and doing ceremony out there. And there's still Navajo people out there gathering plants and things. So I think we ought to think about these things a little bit more because they tell us stuff about the land and land use. We're not learning from the archaeology, although we do get a lot of it, from the macrobotanical and microbotanical, the palynological and the phytolithic analysis. That's wonderful stuff. We need to do a lot more of that. But for people for whom this is still culturally significant, I think we can do a lot better job of this, and I'm happy to share more detailed information about all this because I didn't get into half of it. But and my thesis can be found online. It's published by Creative Commons as free cultural materials because I don't own any of this information, right? It's out there. So I guess I probably have time for a question or two. Thank you very much. I just hope that we can.
One question?
All right. Yes. Hi, my favorite. Hello, Connie.
Why do sometimes do we still see wolfberry like at the Great Cottonwood Falls Great House just on the site and not like 10 meters outside of the site?
Cooing in the middens. That's my best guess. Is like people doing their business in the middens. But that's a wonderful correlation, and I've had 3 different plant people, not archaeologists, tell me, yeah, I see a lot of wolfberry around Puebloan sites. That's like one of those things that you can see sticking up out of the desert. And, there's a spot. Wolfberry on a mound, yeah, there's a spot. We found, yeah, and it's really cool. But I think it's because they're pooing in the middens, Yeah. There's a lot of stuff so Richard Yarnell's Distinctive Flora of Puebloan Ruins, 1965, American anthropologist, very cool. He looked at plants that he found on ruins at Bandelier that he did not find past the ruins. I found it late in my research, but it's a fantastic resource. Thank you.